David moved before the frozen finished rising. The axe came down in both hands. The creature's mouth opened at the same instant. Its scream escaped first. The sound tore through the dark living room, sharp and violent, carrying through the shattered front window and out into the frozen street. Then the axe split through its skull, driving its head back into the remains of the coffee table and cutting the scream off halfway through. Silence rushed into the space it left behind. The frozen folded beneath the blade. Its fingers scraped once across the carpet, disturbing glass, splintered wood, and the thin layer of snow that had blown through the broken window. Then it stopped. David pulled the axe free. For less than a second, he stood perfectly still. His eyes fixed on the empty air in front of him. They moved slightly, as though following words only he could see. Marcus noticed. Margaret noticed too. Neither had time to ask. David looked away from whatever had appeared. Get to the van. A shotgun thundered directly outside the Hale house. The blast came from the front yard, close enough to shake the loose glass still clinging to the living room frame. Ray Bowers screamed. The large frozen had thrown him into the snow in front of the house only moments earlier. Now Ray was somewhere beyond the curtains with his shotgun, drunk, injured, and surrounded by the creatures his shouting had drawn into the street. The shotgun fired again. Stay back. Another blast. Then Ray's voice twisted into panic. David pointed toward the dining room and the attached garage beyond it. Move. Marcus took his mother's hand. Margaret held the heavy flashlight in her other. Its beam passed across the dead frozen, the blood on the axe, and the family room they had lived in for years. Marcus pulled her toward the dining room. The garage was on the far side of the house. The van was waiting inside. Packed. Fueled. Ready. They only had to reach it. Behind them, broken glass shifted. Another frozen was climbing through the living room window. It had once been an ordinary man. A torn winter jacket hung from its shoulders, and one sleeve was dark with frozen blood. Pale hands gripped the lower frame while it dragged itself over the jagged glass without hesitation. Margaret's flashlight passed over its face. The creature did not react to the light. Its eyeless head turned toward the sound of their footsteps. David stepped backward, keeping himself between the frozen and his family. He did not attack it. Not yet. Every second spent fighting was a second taken from the van. Keep going. Outside, Ray's shotgun fired again. The blast was followed by a heavy impact and a scream that no longer sounded angry. Ray begged. His words came through the broken window in pieces. No. A wet tearing sound followed. Ray screamed harder. His boots scraped against the frozen ground outside the front of the Hale house. The shotgun fired one final time, the blast angled and wild, and then metal clattered against the pavement. Something large roared over him. The smaller frozen shrieked. Ray's voice became a choking, ruined sound. Marcus did not look back. He did not need to see what was happening outside. He could hear enough. The dining room waited ahead. Beyond it was the short passage, leading to the attached garage. Marcus could almost feel the van around them already. Metal doors, locked windows, the engine starting, his father behind the wheel, his mother beside him. They were going to make it. The thought arrived complete. Certain. Then the dining room window exploded. Glass burst inward. A human-sized frozen launched through the opening with the snow at its back. Its body struck the edge of the table, flipped across the polished wood, and crashed to the floor directly between the Hale family and the passage to the garage. Marcus stopped so suddenly that Margaret collided with his shoulder. The frozen lay, twisted among broken chairs. For one fraction of a second, the root remained visible beyond it. The garage door. The van on the other side. Safety measured in only a few yards. Then the creature pushed itself upright. It had once been a woman, She still wore dark office trousers and a pale blouse beneath a torn coat. One shoe was missing, and blackened toes dragged across the floor as she turned toward them. Her mouth opened. The scream filled the house. This one did not end halfway through. It carried through the dining room, through the broken windows, and out across the neighborhood. The answer came immediately. A shriek rose from the front yard. Another sounded across the street. More followed between the neighboring houses. Near. Far. Then everywhere. The frozen climbing through the living room window answered the call. Bodies began striking the Hale house. A shoulder hit the remaining front glass. Something slammed into a side window. The kitchen window shattered. The back door shook violently in its frame. Once. Twice. Again. The Hale home seemed to come apart around them. Snow blew through the broken windows. Curtains snapped in the wind. A framed family photograph fell from the wall and broke against the floor. David looked once toward the garage route. The frozen stood directly in the passage. More shapes were already moving outside the dining room window behind it. The van was close enough to imagine. It was no longer reachable. Basement. Marcus turned toward him. The basement door was toward the back of the house, in the opposite direction. David drew his handgun. Go. The dining room frozen lunged. David fired. The muzzle flash turned the powerless room white for an instant. The bullet struck the creature high in the chest and snapped it backward, but it remained on its feet. David fired again before it recovered. The second shot struck its head. The frozen dropped across the broken chairs. Move. Marcus pulled Margaret away from the garage. They ran toward the back of the house. Margaret's flashlight bounced across the walls ahead of them. The beam caught familiar things in broken fragments. The kitchen cabinets, the bowl where David left his keys, Margaret's calendar, a framed drawing Marcus had made when he was 9. The house remained their home, round the violence. That made everything worse. Behind them, David fired again. The frozen that had climbed through the living room window staggered when the bullet struck its shoulder. It fell against the couch, rose again, and kept coming. David shot it in the head. It collapsed. Another climbed through behind it. David backed away. He kept the handgun extended toward the advancing frozen while the axe remained in his other hand. He did not rush forward. He did not try to clear the house. He fired only to hold them back. One shot killed a frozen coming through the dining room. Another tore through the leg of a creature rushing from the kitchen. It crashed to the floor and immediately began dragging itself forward with both hands. David left it alive. He did not have time to finish every creature he injured. He needed only to slow them. Marcus held tightly to Margaret's hand. They reached the kitchen. The back door bent inward under another impact. Wood cracked beside the lock. The top hinge tore partly free. Margaret looked toward it. Don't stop, Marcus said. They kept moving. The basement was close. Marcus knew every step between them and the door. He had walked the route carrying laundry, tools, storage boxes, and groceries for as long as he could remember. Tonight it felt longer. Not because they moved slowly. Because Marcus noticed everything. The cold air pouring through the broken kitchen window. The pressure of his mother's fingers around his hand. The sound of David's boots retreating behind them. The sharp smell of gunpowder mixing with snow and blood. The way Margaret's flashlight shook, then steadied, then shook again. The back door gave way. It slammed into the kitchen wall, hard enough to break plaster. Several frozen forced themselves through the opening. Most were human-sized. Men and women in ruined clothes. A delivery driver. A woman in pajama pants. A man with one blackened hand, still wearing a wedding ring. They pushed over one another to enter, shrieking and clawing, human shapes emptied of everything human, except the bodies they had stolen. David fired into them. The first dropped. The next took a bullet through the shoulder and spun into the doorframe. Another came through low, scrambling across the floor on all fours. David shot at once and backed into the rear hallway. He stayed close enough that Marcus could still hear his breathing between the shots. Almost there, Marcus told his mother. The basement door appeared ahead. Ordinary brown wood. An old brass knob. A scratch near the bottom Marcus had made years ago while carrying a shelf upstairs. The sight of it filled him with relief, so sudden that it hurt. They were going to make it. The basement had concrete walls. It had its own door leading outside. They could lock themselves inside, wait for the frozen to pass, and escape through the rear when the yard cleared. Marcus did not question any part of that plan. He needed it to be true. David fired again. A frozen fell across the hallway behind them. Another stumbled but did not stop. The creatures were getting closer. David continued retreating. His shots came carefully, not wildly. He killed those he could and injured the ones he could not, breaking their momentum long enough to take another step backward toward his wife and son. A frozen rushed him from the side. It moved faster than the others. David turned the handgun, but the creature struck his arm before he could fire. Its shoulder slammed into his elbow, knocking the weapon from his hand. The handgun hit the floor. It slid away beneath the narrow hallway table. David did not look for it. Both hands closed around the axe. The frozen lunged again. David swung. The blade struck the side of its head and drove it violently into the wall. Bone and plaster broke together beneath the impact. The frozen collapsed. David pulled the axe free and stepped backward. He was only a few yards behind Margaret now. More frozen entered the hallway. Some ran. Some crawled on limbs damaged by David's bullets. All of them kept coming. David lifted the axe and continued backing toward his family. He did not go forward to meet them. He stayed near Marcus and Margaret. Near enough to protect them. Near enough that they could still reach him. Marcus reached the basement door. He released the knob and pulled it open. Dark stairs descended beyond the threshold. No light. No furnace hum. Nothing warm or welcoming. It looked like safety. Marcus stepped partly inside and turned toward his mother. "Come on." Margaret reached him. Her fingers tightened around his hand. She stepped into the doorway. Marcus backed down onto the first stair, leading her with him. Behind her, David was almost there. For one small, perfect moment, Marcus saw the three of them surviving. His mother crossing the threshold. His father following. The door closing. The old hallway side lock turning. The monsters remaining outside. Margaret's next step never landed. A wounded frozen came around the rear corner near the floor. Its hand closed around her ankle. It pulled. Margaret was torn backward so suddenly that Marcus had no chance to brace himself. Her hand ripped from his grip, and her body struck the hallway floor. One instant she was with him. The next she was gone. "Mom." Marcus stepped out of the basement. He did not decide to. There was no time for thought. His mother was on the floor, being dragged away, and his body moved toward her before the horror of it could reach his mind. David caught the front of his jacket. Marcus was pulled around. His father's face filled his vision. David forced their eyes together for one brief instant. No explanation. No argument. No time. Live. The word was barely more than a whisper. Then David threw him into the basement. Marcus struck the first steps and fell backward. The door slammed. The ordinary lock turned from the hallway side. Click. That was all. Marcus lunged upward. He seized the knob and twisted. It did not move. "Dad." He pulled harder. The door shook beneath his hands. "Dad, open it." David did not answer. Marcus struck the wood with his shoulder. The frame held. "Mom!" Something scraped across the hallway outside. Margaret cried out. Marcus grabbed the knob again, wrenching it uselessly back and forth. "Let me out." His father moved away from the door. Marcus heard it. David could have entered the basement. There had been room. There had been time. He could have pushed Marcus inside, followed him, and shut the door behind them. Margaret had been pulled away. The hallway was filling with frozen. David knew exactly what staying meant. He stayed anyway. 27 years. Marcus could not think of them as a number. He saw them in pieces. His parents laughing across the breakfast table that morning. His father warming Margaret's car before work. His mother saving the crisp corner of every casserole because David liked it. The two of them arguing over directions and reaching for each other's hands afterward without thinking. David calling her Maggie. Margaret pretending she disliked it. 27 years of ordinary devotion. David had saved his son. Then he had turned back toward his wife. Marcus pressed himself against the basement door. "Dad, please." The sounds outside became confused. Feet. Claws. The axe shifting. Margaret's breath breaking into terrified sobs. Then David's voice reached her. "I'm here." 2 words. Nothing more. Marcus closed his eyes. His father had not promised that everything would be all right. He had not lied to her. He had only told her the one thing he could still make true. She was not alone. The axe struck. A frozen screamed. Marcus threw his shoulder into the door. The wood jumped in its frame, but the lock held. "Dad." Another impact sounded outside. David shouted with effort. The axe struck again. Marcus searched blindly along the dark landing until his hand found the steel pry bar where it had fallen. He shoved its curved end into the narrow space beside the lock. He pulled. The frame creaked. A splinter broke loose beneath the metal. The door remained closed. Upstairs, David fought. Marcus could not see him. That made every sound worse. The axe cutting through something. A body hitting the wall. Frozen shrieking over one another. Margaret crying out. David's breathing, harsh and desperate, each breath followed by another swing. Marcus pulled harder on the pry bar. The wood cracked. Not enough. "Come on." He changed the angle and pulled again. The tool slipped free. Marcus struck the door with both fists. "Dad." The answer was another roar from the hallway. David was not fighting because he believed he could survive. Marcus knew that. His father understood numbers. Distance. Weight. Risk. He had seen the creatures filling the house. He knew the large frozen was still somewhere outside. He knew the handgun was gone and the basement was behind him. David knew exactly how impossible the fight was. He fought anyway. He fought because Margaret was there. Because Marcus was behind the locked door. Because the woman he had loved for more than half his life would not spend her final moments abandoned on the floor while he hid a few feet away. David fought because impossible and unnecessary were not the same thing. Marcus drove the pry bar into the frame again. His arms shook as he pulled. The old wood split a little farther. The lock held. Above him, the axe struck again. The blow sounded heavier than the last. Then came a pause. Marcus stopped moving. He listened. Another strike. Slower. A frozen screamed. David answered with a raw sound of effort that seemed pulled from somewhere beneath pain and exhaustion. Marcus hit the door. "Dad." The axe struck again. The sound was weaker. Marcus pulled at the door until his injured hands slipped from the knob. He thought of the basement's exterior exit. For one wild instant, it seemed like a path. Down the stairs. Out through the rear door. Around the house. Back to his parents. Marcus turned. Then he heard movement directly outside the basement entrance. Snow compressed beneath several feet. Something scraped its fingers across the outer door. A frozen shrieked from the rear yard. Another answered close beside it. Marcus understood. The house was surrounded. Opening that door would not take him to his parents. It would only waste what David had purchased for him. He turned back toward the stairs. The axe struck above. Once. A pause. Then again. Marcus climbed to the landing and pressed both hands against the locked door. "Dad," David shouted one final time. The sound came through the door raw and broken, filled with pain, fury, and everything he had left. Then something heavy struck the hallway floor. The axe did not rise again. Marcus waited. 1 second. 2. 3. Nothing. No swing. No shout. No sound of his father forcing himself back to his feet. Only the frozen moving above him. Marcus's face collapsed. A sob tore out of him before he could stop it. He struck the basement door one final time. "Dad." His fist hit the wood without strength. The blow barely shook it. Marcus pressed his forehead against the door and cried. Not quietly. Not with any control. His parents were only a few feet away. His mother was on the other side of the wall. His father was on the other side of the wall. But neither of them answered. A dragging step sounded in the hallway. Marcus froze. Another followed. Slow. Uneven. Coming closer. The floorboards creaked beneath the weight of something moving toward the basement. Marcus pulled his face away from the door. A frozen stopped directly outside. Its hand struck the wood. The door jumped inward against the lock. Marcus stumbled backward. The frozen did not hit it again. It stood there, listening. Marcus heard the faint scrape of its fingers against the other side, the quiet click of its teeth, the slow movement of its head as it searched for the sound that had drawn it there. Marcus clamped both hands over his mouth. His next sob caught behind his palms. He backed down the stairs one step at a time. The old wood creaked beneath his weight. Each sound felt impossibly loud. The frozen remained outside the door. Waiting. Listening. Marcus continued downward until his heel reached the concrete floor. He did not turn around. He kept his eyes fixed on the darkness above him, watching the basement door as though it might burst open at any moment. The creature scraped its hand across the wood once more. Then another sound came from deeper inside the house. The frozen turned toward it. Its footsteps moved away. Slowly. One dragging step after another. Marcus lowered his hands only enough to breathe. The basement was dark around him. The only light came through the small ground-level windows, weak and blue beneath the snow outside. It barely reached the walls. It did not reach the corners. Marcus stood at the bottom of the stairs and understood. His parents were gone. There would be no answer from the other side of the door. No footsteps coming back. No voice telling him what to do next. No father working through the problem. No mother waiting for him to come upstairs. He was alone. The realization did not arrive like a thought. It settled through him slowly, filling every empty space the way cold filled a room after the heat failed. Alone. Above him, frozen moved through his home. They shuffled through the hallway. They crossed the kitchen. They knocked against furniture and dragged their feet over broken glass. Sometimes one struck a wall or overturned something that had survived the attack. Sometimes several moved together, their clicking mouths and uneven steps overlapping, until Marcus could no longer tell how many remained inside. He had nowhere to go. The basement's exterior door led into a yard surrounded by them. The interior door led back into the house where his parents had died. There was no choice to make. No action that could fix anything. Marcus moved backward until his shoulders touched the concrete wall beside the stairs. His legs gave out. He slid to the floor. He pulled his knees tightly against his chest and wrapped both arms around them. His body shook. He pressed his face down against his sleeves, trying to keep every sound inside himself. Time passed. Marcus did not know how much. Minutes stretched until they felt like hours. Then hours passed without feeling real at all. He remained against the wall, holding himself together while the frozen wandered through the rooms above him. Every scrape of a foot made him lift his head. Every creak in the floor made his heart begin pounding again. Sometimes one approached the basement door. Sometimes it stopped there. Sometimes a hand brushed the wood. Each time, Marcus covered his mouth and waited for the lock to fail. It never did. The lock his father had turned remained closed. The last thing David had done still protected him. Marcus cried until no more tears came. Then he continued sitting there with his arms around his knees, empty and exhausted, listening to the creatures move through what had once been his home. The basement grew colder. His hands ached. His eyes burned. His head became too heavy to hold upright. He tried to stay awake. He told himself that closing his eyes was dangerous. He told himself he needed to listen. He needed to be ready. But his body had reached its limit. There was nothing left in him. No strength. No thought. No fear sharp enough to keep him conscious. His head sank forward onto his knees. The shuffling continued overhead. The frozen remained inside the house. Marcus remained alone beneath them. Physical exhaustion took him first. Emotional exhaustion followed. Sitting against the basement wall, arms still locked around his knees, Marcus finally slipped into unconsciousness. And slept.